For many weeks and even a few months now, we've been really focusing on discipleship when we preach, when we teach. And that discipleship idea is one of those ideas that, as I've noted a few times, can mean a lot to a lot of different people. Here at St. Michael, discipleship is really that process, a journey in which the spiritual growth allows us to become more like the person of Jesus Christ. In practical terms, that kind of process takes commitment. It is not a moment. Discipleship isn't some magic moment where we decide that now we will be good, or we will be polite, or we will do things right. Discipleship is much more than that. It is a commitment and a recommitment again and again every day to actually move closer and closer to God. We heard from Isaiah today, all we like sheep have gone astray. This idea that we in our humanity have the real capacity to go astray then necessarily means that our response to Christ is a commitment every day to actually choosing the way of discipleship, choosing the way of Christ to shape and reshape us and transform us over time so that we really are more and more like Christ himself. So let me just say that a little differently. Discipleship is not some moment where we make one decision and then that decision takes care of everything for the rest of our life with no extra work. Discipleship is really about making that decision every day and making that decision with a greater and deeper level of commitment every day. And that is what transforms us over time. Now, I think we see this idea of how discipleship shifts us over time in today's gospel lesson. So in today's gospel lesson, Jesus is traveling along with his disciples, and seemingly out of nowhere, James and John, who are brothers, who have been called by Jesus to be part of his inner circle of discipleship, come to Jesus and they say to him, "Jesus, we'd like you to do whatever we ask." And in my heart of hearts, I think that Jesus rolled his eyes. I think that he was a hard eye roll in that moment, because as any of us know, when someone says, "I have something I really want you to do," it probably means you don't really want to do it, or else they wouldn't have prefaced their question that way. And so maybe Jesus was a little too polite and he didn't actually roll his eyes, but he felt it inside. And so James and John, they say to him, "We would like to sit at your right hand and at your left in your glory, in your kingdom." Now, what does that mean? Now, I think the starting place here is that James and John had an epiphany. James and John really did believe that Jesus is who he said he is. James and John had this wonderful moment of belief where whatever they had thought before this point has been changed because they genuinely see Jesus as this amazing person, definitely a prophet, a great teacher, maybe even the Son of God. And in Jesus, they see this huge promise of God, and that has nudged them forward in their faith. They definitely started following Jesus. They have been learning from Jesus, and they have this moment where I think deep down they desire something good. They desire to be part of the work that Jesus is doing. And yet, right there with that epiphany and that faith, creeps back in whatever they understand about themselves that the world has told them is important. That desire for power, that desire for authority, that desire for credit, for whatever kind of faithfulness that they actually have. And so there they go asking Jesus to have the authority and the credit and the presence and the reward for their faith. And then Jesus very kindly says, "Are you sure you want this?" And when they say yes, he says, "Okay, you're going to have it. You will get what you want. You will get that kind of transformation. If you understand who I really am and what I'm really doing and what I can do for you, then you will get the transformation that you hope for." And in that experience, in that story, I think we see a lot of us. I think that we can relate very much to where James and John are in this story. Because that moment of faith, that epiphany, that's sort of like us when we realize that God is real And we realize that Jesus, the way of love, that's really good for us. That there is truth anchored deep down in the message of Jesus and what Jesus promises. And yet, that moment, that belief, that epiphany for us does not prevent the world from creeping back in. Even if, in very good faith, we want to commit ourselves to Jesus, it is so easy for the world to creep back in and then create all kinds of reasons and excuses to keep us from actually following the path that in the moment we feel so passionate that we wish to follow. What Jesus is doing in this moment with his disciples is actually continuing to nudge them, knowing that it's always going to be a little bit forward, a little bit backwards, and that give and take over time should actually move us down the path and help us to deepen our discipleship day by day. Here at St. Michael, we emphasize discipleship formation because I truly believe that all of us, every one of us who comes to church, all of us in this space right now, even those of us online, we believe that God is real and we know that the promise of Jesus is true. We also know that God calls us to do things that we don't always want to do. That God calls us into a life that is not always easy to be faithful to. That kind of life and the decisions and what we're called to do and the actions to take are ones that might feel good, but ultimately can scare us. But it only takes the willingness for us to say yes each day to God, to get the kind of courage to allow us to make progress a little bit at a time, day by day. Now, each week we'll continue to talk about discipleship because the transformation takes a long time, not days, not months, not years, decades, our entire life in order to really reach the kind of transformation that God promises us. And you know that discipleship here is now being defined in a way that allows us to reflect on who we are and what we do, and then to make incremental progress with very thoughtful decisions around prayer and learning and service and giving. And it begins with giving. We, as a church, represent the promise of Christ to the world. We can often think that the promise is for us as individuals, and of course it is. But that's not all there is. Because each one of us as individuals comes together as a community, and then we as an entire community represent that promise of Christ to everyone out in the world. That's the responsibility. It's the privilege that we get to carry. That together we can do so much more than we can on our own. And when we commit to that discipleship together in this community, then we as one body begin to affect transformation, not only here, but out in the world. Giving is the very first step to get us on that commitment journey. And giving is something that is critically important to each and every one of us. Now, at present, only about half of the people who are active here in this church make regular gifts each year to our shared mission and ministry. But I am very sure that the half that do not give don't keep from giving for some bad reason, but that giving has just simply not become part of their process, part of their commitment. For those of you who don't give, today is your invitation. Today is your invitation to get on the path, to actually put your money where your mouth is, sort of, and to actually make that kind of commitment a part of your life, to invest yourself in what we do here, to be so yoked to the purpose that we share in Christ that you cannot help day to day but to care more and to do more about your own personal transformation. Giving, Jesus says, is what actually transforms our hearts and our souls. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It doesn't matter if you care enough just yet, because Jesus says, if you give, you will care. And I want you to give enough to care more about your own transformation and about the work that we as a church do together to transform the world around us. Now, last week I did hit this idea pretty hard, and during the week a parishioner stopped me very excitedly and wanted to tell me that she went home last week after my sermon and she was really trying to figure out how she might be able to invest herself a little bit more in St. Michael and our mission. Well, the problem is that she lives on fixed income and doesn't have a lot of latitude about what she could give. But as she kind of prayed on it and thought about it, after a day or so, it occurred to her that she's had a landline in her apartment since like the mid-'80s. And nobody knows that phone number anymore, and nobody calls her on that phone anymore. And so she said, I can actually cancel that line, and I can give that money to the church to increase my pledge. What is amazing about that is not only did she go home and really consider what she could do to deepen her own investment in our shared mission, but she was so excited to come tell me she did that. Because that's actually what happens when we commit ourselves and when we invest ourselves and when that investment means something to us, we cannot help but let the joy of the giving begin to infect everything about us. We often think when we give, it's like a chore. But when we give in a way that is principally anchored in the idea of our own discipleship, it becomes a joy. And that joy becomes infectious, and it overflows, and it empowers, and it transforms. That is the kind of giving that we are here to do. That is the kind of giving I'm inviting all of us to do, whether you have given every year of your life or whether you have never given at all. The giving is how we continue to invest in the foundation of our own faithfulness. Yes, there is more, way more beyond the giving. But do not mistake that investing ourselves very deeply and truly with real money is what actually hooks us on to this path of discipleship. Every one of us has the opportunity to give or to give a little more. Every one of us has the opportunity to invest in the way that our hearts are committed to our mission. Do not let the world sneak in and creep in and tell you what you cannot do. Instead, allow Jesus to tell you what you can do, and when you do, how you will be transformed for good. Amen.